Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bassam Haddad. I am joined by my partner in crime, co-hosting, co-moderating this really important event, Professor Lisa Wedeen from the University of Chicago. Marhaba, Lisa.
مرحبتين شكرا.
Hala. Thank you for joining me, Lisa, because I need more power to handle these powerhouses. Now, this is the second installment of Students Rising, dispatches from the encampments, but now that they have been dismantled, we are using the title Dismantling Repression, Imagining Futures. And today we hear reports by students from the University of Chicago, the GW encampment, which includes the DC, Maryland, and Virginia metropolitan universities, including GMU, AU, as well as Gallaudet University, and a number of other universities that we will be mentioning. We have folks joining from Columbia, from NYU and New York City in general, as well as CUNY potentially at 4:15 p.m. and UCLA. And these folks have been part of the encampments that have been usually so far dismantled, often brutally. Even though they're peaceful, they have been peaceful and actually quite exemplary. Nonetheless, they have been violently dismantled by police this week, specifically University of Chicago encampment and the GW encampment. And that happened in the middle of the night. And others actually have had very similar experiences prior: Columbia, CUNY, NYU, and beyond. This is, again, our second installment, and we will be joining you again next week with more of the same, but perhaps at a different stage and different level, given most universities are going to be fading out into the summer. And I assume, will be speaking with you about other strategies that you're pursuing. Before I actually introduce our University of Chicago folks, I would like to welcome Lisa again and see if you have anything to share with us, Lisa, before we proceed.
No, just my gratitude to everyone for taking the time and for being here with us today. And I look forward to hearing about your experiences of the encampment and the kind of joy and euphoria that one could experience, albeit in the context of the horrors of what is going on in Gaza, and then of course the kind of disappointment that accompanied the dismantling or destruction of the encampment. So I look forward to hearing about your experiences, and I appreciate your courage. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. So given that you are at the University of Chicago, I'd like you to take the lead with this part of the conversation, if you don't mind.
If somebody wouldn't mind starting narrating a bit of your experiences in the encampment, organizing. I know some of you may have been involved in negotiations. Some of that probably is confidential, but whatever you feel that you can share with us, we'd appreciate it. And then, of course, the experience of being raided in the early morning hours, which we've heard a bit about before, but would like to hear from you now again as well. Thank you.
And
so
just to be
maybe Christopher, do you want to start, or?
Yeah. I can't. No, I was the only one of the three of us who was present at the onset of the raid, so maybe I can defer to the other two to talk more about the earlier aspects of the action.
And before you start, I apologize for this. I just want to make sure that everyone here is introduced in one way or another. So can I just go quickly and share who's here? Is it okay if I use the name that you have?
Sure, you have a better sense of who wants to share their names. Please do that. Thank you.
You guys all put the names as you registered that you want me to use, right? Okay. So we have Marie from UCLA. Hi, Marie. All right. And
hi, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Hala. We have Bashar from GMU. Hala. We have the GW contingent. I'm not going to say the name because you have No, wait a minute. There you go. Can I use your name from GW? All right, Lance from GW. Hi, Lance. And we have Yasmin from Gallaudet University. And from Colombia, we have Fadi. Hi, Fadi. And from Hassan is from University of Chicago as well.
Chicago.
Okay, welcome everybody. I cannot express how
I think
thankful...
you forgot somebody, Bassam. You forgot someone from Chicago.
Oh, the two people at the bottom. Yeah, that's what you get for being at the bottom of the screen. Sorry. And we have Christopher and Amira from University of Chicago. Hala wa sahla. All right. I just wanted to reiterate how proud we are of you and how much you've actually been a guiding light for so many of us. I have been on various, conversations, and of course, throughout social media, people are talking about how professors and faculty are inciting you. They have no idea that you are actually the bright light that is leading all of us. So thank you for being here, and I'll stop here and we'll resume with Christopher's suggestion that others begin the conversation about the time prior to the raid.
Yeah, Hassan, if I can start, is that okay? Hi everyone, my name is Amira. If you notice my voice is gone, it's because we've been marching in the streets even since the dismantlement of our encampment. So just proof that we haven't stopped since. We have a very strong mobilizing force in Chicago. So if there's anything that you need clarity on that isn't audible because my voice is gone, please let me know. But yeah, the UChicago Popular University. Oh, also real quick before I start, what's a time check on the? I'm sure we don't need to give as much context as you did in other interviews, but can you give us a time check on?
If we can actually address the different encampments in sort of 12 to 15-minute chunks, that would be good. But 12 minutes is good because we're going to go back to the later questions afterwards.
Lovely. Okay. So yeah, the UChicago Popular University for Gaza, our encampment for Gaza, was student-led active protest aimed at responding to the gravity of the moment. We had an 8-day encampment before we were dismantled, and it is one of the first spaces me as a Palestinian student, and I know a lot of other students of color, a lot of other organizing students had felt that there was a space or a safe communal space on campus. Some of the teachings we had were environmental justice, revolutionary poetry, ASL training, history of U.S. Jewish anti-Zionism, medical apartheid, somatics for the revolution, and history of the displacement in Hyde Park. So you can see we kind of disrupted the barrier of the barriers imposed by the institution. As in, this wasn't only a student, faculty, and university affiliated space. We had taken up space within the university and had also invited orgs outside of the university on the South Side and their broader Chicagoland organizing community, especially taking the lead from Palestine organizers to come, give teach-ins, to be a part of the movement space. Another thing we did, Ali Reza Dustar, who's a professor here, kind of mentioned in a talk yesterday, was disrupt the kind of power dynamics of what it means to be an instructor versus a student. As in, this was student-led, and faculty and senior organizers in the community had come to offer guidance and criticism and learn in a way that wasn't as strict as the normal boundaries of the university, which I think a lot of people found very productive and kind of more intentional part of the space. Hassan, if you want to add to how the encampment was.
Definitely. So again, I'm Hassan from the University of Chicago Encampment. I would say we also drew a lot of lessons from the previous encampments that came before us, and looked at the way that the media covered these encampments. Is my voice coming through fine?
Yes, perfect.
So we looked at the other encampments. We looked at the way that the administrations and police departments dealt with them, their successes, and one of the initiatives that I was part of was trying to find a way to reframe the media attention away from sort of like an internal US campus discourse about free speech or the safety of students and back onto centering Gaza, centering anti-imperial struggle and centering anti-colonialism and drawing on a legacy of these people and movements that came before us. One of the ways we did this is through our social media communications, including the story of a Palestinian revolutionary martyr or political prisoner in addition to giving updates about our camps. So whether that was Walid Taqwa, who died in Israeli prisons, or hosting a teach-in by Sami al-Aryan in the actual encampment. We had discussions about works by Frantz Fanon. We had Fred Hampton Jr. came to the encampment and spoke. We did a post about Nizar Banat. We drew inspiration from Basla Araj in terms of thinking about how what it means to have a popular university and to be an engaged intellectual. We tried to emphasize the struggle of the Palestinian students, student activists in Palestine, whether those who have been tortured and placed under administrative detention, like Layan Kayed, and we were in direct communication with the students at AUB and Birzeit and other places. And also, just looking back at the history of leftism in the Middle East, and also like the current revolutionaries, whether reading things by Hassan Kanafani, discussing Mahdi Amar, or like considering current revolutionary figures like Ibrahim Nabulsi and other people. So we really try to like emphasize the fact that we're part of a global movement, try to distance ourselves from a narrative that this is an issue of like free speech or campus tensions or something that's limited to a U.S. campus context, and place ourselves within a revolutionary legacy as much as we could.
I can say a little bit about the negotiations and then move on to the raid, if that sounds good.
Sounds great.
I think very understandably, in light of the cases of Northwestern, Brown, a couple others, there was some reticence, particularly among those in the camp who didn't know us personally, about the very premise of entering into negotiations. Personally, I feel that they served a very productive function in this encampment on a couple different levels, in a way that I hope might set an alternative precedent for how negotiations can be a part of this sort of action without resulting in capitulation. One thing that happened was that after the first of all, it was very clear that the three of us were all at different points, at least, on the negotiation committee. It was more like a delegation than it was proper negotiators, because it was very clear, and we made this clear both to the admin and to the camp, that we had no decision-making power. And in fact, even if we wanted it, we didn't have it. If we accepted some stupid offer and came back to the camp, no one would take it seriously. So our role really was to go lay out the demands of the camp, particularly those related to Gaza and related to Palestine, and to see, given the different levels of desperation that the administration reached, what they were willing to concretely offer in the way of meeting explicit demands. That was our role. The first meeting involved the president and provost personally. It ended basically with them storming out of the meeting angrily after we said, because they were itching for what's a quick thing that we could do, to start to establish trust, to start to work toward winding down the encampment. He said, well, one quick demand that could be met quite easily is a statement, not as a condition for ending the encampment, but at the very least as a first step to build some trust, given that this administration has given us negative 1 million reasons to trust them over the last number of years. So we said you could issue a statement about the scholasticide in Gaza in particular. This we thought was a pretty easy thing for the university to do. It would frankly be a smart thing for them to do if they really want to keep up this brand of being the vanguard of free expression, academic speech, and so forth. This was shot down very fast, however, because the president refused to acknowledge, even as a factual matter off the record, that a single university in Gaza had been bombed, no matter what sources were offered, including like the Israeli military's Twitter feed or something. He maintained that this would be a political position because there might be some people who would disagree with it, which is obviously ridiculous. And so at that point, we just sort of like heckled him until he left. They came back though, like the next morning he sent this sort of tough guy email saying like the encampment cannot continue, it's going to end. But we were able to keep building enough strength that they came back that night and started offering us concessions simply as preconditions for returning to the meeting, not as anything related to ending the encampment or reducing it. And one that we did secure and that we need to hold them to was that they announced a Gaza Scholars at Risk initiative to provide funding and salaries and housing assistance for 8 Palestinian scholars affected by this genocide. Beyond that, though, every time that the actual negotiations commenced, every time anything substantive, even remotely, was on the table, the president eventually got involved, shot it down, drained it of all substance. So they were operating in bad faith, even though we did get that one concession from them to talk. But there was still value in the way that we kept up the negotiations, because we had also secured as a precondition that there would be no police raid of the camp for 12 hours for as long as the talks continued, and also secured a reduced police presence on the quad as it was happening. So it became not only a means of like seeing how desperate they get and seeing if they actually start offering real things, but also a means of keeping the camp safe as it was as the talks were ongoing. I can talk about the raid, but I feel a little bad because I've been talking. But
we love to hear Chris talk anyway. I just think one thing that is important to note within our specific context is that we had carried out negotiations willing to see how far the administration was willing to go, and I think we were kind of stuck between two, especially given our proximity to Northwestern and how people's differing views on how those negotiations had gone. We were unwilling to walk out of a negotiation with a deal that was not going to be productive to the movement at large, or even would not be productive within a local context as some kind of snowball effect that would be helpful to the broader the broader movement. So even if we had walked out of a deal, it would have to be a very, very good deal that would be productive for long-term organizing around Palestine at this university. That obviously was not the case. Although we did get very close to it, the administration had pulled out of, has suspended negotiations themselves and pulled out when we had asked for very specific language about initiatives and programs that they were offering. We wanted specific language to ensure that it was going to go towards Palestinians and Gazans that they were intended to, because they had already acted in bad faith, and we were sure that they were not going to hold themselves accountable. We'd also asked for very specific timelines and financial commitments to be also specific or very concretely defined within the negotiation and in the final draft of the deal. Once we had asked for those specifications of wording, financial commitment, and timeline, we walked out of the meeting, and like 10 minutes later, we found out they had suspended negotiations immediately. So that's where the university had left things. And then if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, and so then the raid happened on a night when we had some reason to suspect that it might happen, and for that reason had mobilized a lot of people until around 4 a.m., at which point a significant number of people went home. This is, I would say, another lesson maybe from our encampment, is that in this type of situation, don't have a large majority of people go home, because there was a plan that had been, it seems like, orchestrated beforehand to wait until people had either gone to sleep or gone home. And at that point, in a completely cowardly and aggressive fashion, when there was maybe 25 or 30 of us sleeping in tents, there was a raid by maybe 40 to 50 officers in riot gear, university police, who came in virtually with no warning. Technically, there was some like speakerphone thing that no one even heard, I think. But like in practice, like we woke up disoriented to officers like storming in and screaming and throwing every item in the encampment in every direction, like nearly hitting people with like chairs, wood planks, whatever. We weren't even sure if we were like being arrested already, because we were completely surrounded by all these cops who were just yelling at us. And at least 2 people were thrown to the ground on the concrete. We have video of this. The dean of students immediately issued a statement claiming that the camp had been dismantled without incident. And the maybe 20 of us who were pushed to just outside the center of campus then managed to form a line and refused to be pushed back further. And we were able to hold that line long enough against the cops until press started coming and until a lot of people started rushing over. And this resulted in like a multi-hour standoff with the cops. We were able to like resist their barricade pushing thing. And eventually, like the de facto rally that emerged at this standoff became too big for them to handle, and so the physical encampment was destroyed. And they tried to threaten us while we were holding this line with like a leave of absence, trespass charges, etc. But people just like ripped those up and continued holding strong. And ultimately, the cops had to step aside and let us back into the quad, at which point we held a sort of like rally outside Levi Hall. And then we held a press conference this morning, both kind of recentering Gaza, that's one goal of it, correcting various lies that the administration has already begun spreading about both the encampment and the raid, and emphasizing that we are operating within a position of unprecedented strength at this university even now, and that this is the last possible time to give up the struggle, that this is the time to continue mobilizing people, escalating tactics, whatever is needed to fight for divestment until Palestine's free, until the genocide ends.
The threats came in the form of leaflets, right?
That's right.
Okay. And has there been any follow-up on that aspect? No.
No, they're already on our Instagram, so people can take a look at them if they'd like to see like the direct wording and maybe understand how their university's response might be similar or different. But they had basically called for indefinite leave of absence or leave for students who were involved in the encampment. But these were leaflets that were already passed out after UCPD had dismantled the encampment. So they kind of were just I don't know, some kind of act or push for power on behalf of the administration and UCPD. Most people, once they received them, they ripped them up immediately in front of the cops or threw them up in the air. Like it was of no consequence to anyone.
If I can just very briefly add that the question of whether Chicago Police Department would be deployed in order to support the Chicago Police Department was something that kind of affected our calculations, and we had um, like no CPD actually came in to support this raid, but there were Cook County sheriffs present on the site.
Also, we already had it on good authority that CPD and the mayor's office did not want to support the raiding or dismantling of any encampment, but given that ours is dismantled, that they would be keeping a lookout on other campuses if they go back up, or DePaul's encampment is still up in Chicago. That they would keep an eye on it and potentially intervene in future escalations or future encampments.
What do you make of the president's allergy towards the word scholasticide in particular, and the denial of, the very facts on the ground?
You want me to?
Hassan, can you respond to how you responded in person?
Yeah, I mean, so firstly, I think Chris has made this point before in other conversations, but it's good to repeat it, is that we didn't even insist in the first meeting that he used the word scholasticide. We offered that, because, well, one thing to clarify, these negotiations, they refused to record them. As a condition of entering them, we said that they must have signed notes. But in the context of us asking him about the universities in Gaza being destroyed, we offered to have him admit it off the record, even just admit the fact without even using the concept, and he refused. And he said that there are different perspectives on this issue, and we said no, there aren't different perspectives. There is one true reality, which is the universities have been bombed. And when he tried to leave the meeting, we basically called him a coward for not doing that, and told the provost that also, she lacks the principles that the other students have in terms of sacrificing their careers and is basically bowing to the interests of the donors and refusing to just acknowledge this fact, which we offered to give any source that they want, but they didn't. They didn't want to acknowledge the universities being bombed. They didn't want to use the word Palestinian. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say that UChicago's president's incompetence in handling this is matched only by his cowardice, and like he clearly is a person who has gotten where he is by deeply ingrained habits of deference to power. That was my perception of him in this meeting, such that for all the talk he and UChicago make of a culture of fearless inquiry, rigorous dialogue, all the rest, he is categorically unwilling to even acknowledge basic facts, because they ultimately threaten not only the narrative that he's trying to uphold of UChicago as being a politically neutral institution, as being a consistent applier of particular values, but because they also probably threaten the narrative about UChicago's own complicity in the genocide, which is, of course, something that they're trying to deny. There's nothing politically neutral about doing a photo op with an Israeli consul general as Israel is being taken to ICJ. Like, there's nothing politically neutral about hosting a military personnel as professors at UChicago, using Israel as some kind of model under the auspices of a partnership with the Israel Institute, which is a propaganda organization. There's nothing neutral about obviously investing in Israel's arms suppliers, about partnering, doing study abroad programs, etc., with various apartheid Israeli universities that train military, that develop technology for the military, and so forth. So he doesn't want to have to reckon with these realities. And so his method, it seems like, is just refusing to have conversations and storming out of the room like a 5-year-old if he's called out on it.
Thank you, folks, so much. We will get back to you later because we would like to ask everyone what is their vision for what's next. And that's something that everybody is talking about, in the sense that we are now moving into summer and people are actually leaving campus for the most part. And the question is it going to be like prior times when people just fade into the ether after school is over, or will this resume? So I will leave that to the end. And I'd like to, at this point, I'd like to thank you very much, all of you, the people who have shared their views, Hassan, Christopher, and Amira. There is no need at this very moment to make any switches with the feed, so you can stay until I ask you on our chat if we have others joining, which we will. But now let's move to the GW encampment. We have with us folks from George Mason, specifically Bashar, George Washington, specifically Lance, Gallaudet, specifically Yasmin, as well as two more people that I am supposed to call Yaya.
It's Yaya and Nada, and we're both from GW.
Yaya and Nada, because you only put Yaya. So so Yaya and Nada from GW as well. So I will leave you with the floor. Feel free to jump in anytime. And let's start with George Mason, because we have one person from George Mason who's with us, sitting out in nature, Bashar. And I know that you were at the encampment when the arrests took place, and you got your share. So if you can start sharing with us what your experience has been at the encampment before we get to the arrests, before we get to dismantling. Let's hear from you, Lance, and Yaya and Nada, as well as Yasmin first.
I just want to make sure you can hear me. You can hear me like continuously.
You are good.
Okay. I will say that the encampment has been an eye-opening experience for a number of reasons. I think it's funny because I spoke to many of the people here that are with me in the encampment of how it was both isolating and very collective, in which it felt at times where we were only, so at some moments we were just 30 of us in the encampment barricaded, where it was extremely isolating because, you know, we were far away from community. But then at times I felt like it was the most connected that I've been to any community in my entire life, both for the political growth that we did, but also for like the community and collective energy that we had together. But in terms of the encampment, I will say, I saw community and students come together in a moment where in DC actions have essentially plateaued in terms of community support and engagement. We had family members, students, and everyone far between camp out for 14, 13 days together, hand in hand, literally side by side on the street and in U Yard. And again, I won't speak on the organizing side. I'm gonna let the GW students do that for themselves. But in terms of the community support that I saw, I think I'd like to speak on that more specifically, because as well as for the people who spoke from the U Chicago for programming, where they spoke on political topics and whether that be prison experience, and those conversations around their specific locale, we had DC organizers come and speak to us about the history of mass mobilizing across a number of topics. We had Harriet's wildest dreams come speak to us about, you know, the escalation in DC. Tactics essentially in repression against not only just students but community in DC that have experiencing this for far too long. And again, I think what the encampment taught us is that even in isolation and even in this small area that we had, you know, taken as a liberated zone, as a you know, as like this like space away from the imperialist core, especially in the heart of DC, we saw it grow and prosper and teach us a number of things that I think you would never have learned in 1,000 years in any four walls in any of those universities in the DMV. And it's like you spoke to, I'm just a George Mason student, but I think in reference, it connected me to student struggle a lot more, especially being I think it's also spoken by U Chicago, but regardless of a creed or religion or color or ethnicity, it kind of grounded the students and the community in a moment in which they realized that regardless of where we were, Gaza was our compass, and Gaza was the moment. We were there for Gaza. You know, in the last day we had our rally, and we were there for Rafah. So again, it was centering politically around this idea of principle and our principled struggle of being there in that very moment. And I think that being there around the students, being there around community all together for those 14 days was pretty eye-opening, and it connected me. And I know that the experiences that I had there will just push me to continue fighting for years to come. And I'm just grateful to have had this opportunity to do this personal growth with people together on the same journey.
Thank you, Bashar. I visited the GMU, GW, or GW encampment, which includes GMU, and I saw everyone there, including a lot of you here, just being so extremely professional, and even though I don't like this word, just so brave and courteous and loving and imaginative. I have not seen any protests in my whole life that actually can come close to the level of humanity that I witnessed. And so, and I saw you leading the way in a few times on the mic and sharing the demands, and also addressing things, you as well as others addressing things that during an encampment keep the encampment safe for everyone, and make sure that everyone is actually also alert and careful and aware, so that they don't respond with a knee-jerk reaction to all sorts of people that are coming in trying to instigate. So I just want to say that I saw this with my own eyes. And I also actually, for some of you who follow our other set of teachings, I actually did, along with my colleagues, I shot a video, but it's completely different than what we're addressing. It's a totally satirical video that responds to the accusations of what you guys are doing during these encampments. We may or may not show it towards the end, but it was an exemplary. What you have been doing, all of you, was exemplary, and I know the others are as well, and as we see on social media. But I just wanted to flag that. Let's move to Lance. Actually, let's move to Yaya and Nada, and then to Yasmin and Lance.
Yeah, I wanted to say, like, to Bashar's point, GW, our DMV SJP encampment had a bit of unique circumstances in the sense that when we first started out, within the first 3 days, we had an encampment that was completely barricaded and circled in by the police. So our encampment that was originally set up was essentially besieged, circled completely by barricades, caught presence completely. We weren't allowed access to the restrooms. The flow of resources inside was extremely limited. We had one medic who was essentially working a 48-hour shift because they wouldn't allow us to get another medic in there once she left. And as a result of that, our community created another encampment on the other side of the barricades, and supported us from the outside. So we had two essentially encampments happening internally and externally. And the barricades came down by the will of the people, and as a result of that, we were able to join these two encampments and participate in what we can only describe as radical world building, where we quite literally abolished border, and had this vision of a community-oriented space, a community-oriented society, where everything you could possibly want or need for could be addressed by your community, and without the oversight and regulation of the state. We were having education, we were having workshops, we had prayer 5 times a day. Just 2 blocks down from the White House, you could hear the adhan ring through the streets of DC 5 times a day. We had religious programming for all major faiths. And we really oriented ourselves in this idea of radical love and care. And as a result, we were kind of balancing the truths of the present and the future, in which we were completely focused on what is happening in Palestine and completely focused on orienting ourselves towards Gaza, but at the same time building a society in which we can imagine a free Palestine, and what that would carry into the future, and modeling that amongst ourselves. So those were my main takeaways from the encampment as it stood. And as a result, not only were we mobilizing with other DMV SJPs, but we were mobilizing with the DMV community at large. We had multiple people who were unhoused, multiple comrades who were living in an encampment just down the street, that were primarily comprised of unhoused people. And GW, being the largest landlord in DC aside from the federal government, was threatening to sweep their encampment within the next 2 weeks. So in a world without borders that we created, we were able to invite those comrades in and participate completely and fully in our community and as members of our liberated society. And even in police custody, 4 of us here on this call were in jail yesterday morning. Even in police custody, our spirits were unable to be broken. We spent 7 hours harassing the police, essentially, while we were in there. Did not stop chanting a single time for 7 hours straight. And I think that was a real testament to the hope and the perseverance and the imagination that we were imbued with. And it absolutely could not even parallel to the fear that the police tried to instill in us.
Yeah, I would like to speak a little bit on the police brutality that we experienced on the day that our encampment was swept. The administration at our university and the federal government have weaponized terms like public safety and outside agitators to diminish the power that we have as a collective in imagining different futures where safety is not reliant on policing or surveillance. And so to see that much state violence inflicted against student organizers and a space for the community just shows how powerful we are as a collective. And also speaking on, the similar tactics that our administration used that echo what our comrades in UChicago experienced. We also were raided at 4 a.m. when many of our community members were asleep. We were at our weakest point. And so the police, they weaponized that weakness and they descended in on us. They had over 300 officers, over 100 circled the students that were still in the encampment. They arrested us with zip ties and they put us into police vans and sent us away. But externally, we had our comrades who were rallying at our support and again met with immense violence. This was the first time that the Metro PD have used tear gas on protesters since 2000. Sorry, pepper spray since 2020. They also kettled ralliers in with their bikes. They were getting physically assaulted by police officers, and these bikes were used to harm our community members. And speaking a little bit on how this radical community we created from the bottom up was completely destroyed is something that breaks all of our hearts. Seeing this society that we built, the art we created, the camps that we created, just be swept away within a morning is really, it's beyond what words can describe. But I also want to reiterate that, this violence that we experienced is very minute compared to the violence that's happening in Palestine right now. Seeing how our encampment was swept so quickly and with such force reminds us of the just brutality that Palestinians in the West Bank experience when their homes are demolished and bulldozed, or the neighborhoods in Gaza that are indiscriminately bombarded. And so I think that even though our encampment is physically gone, we still hold the spirit of revolution and Palestine in our hearts. And this only strengthens our resolve, and we'll continue to fight. And our focus on Gaza right now is hyper-focused.
Yeah, just to also speak a little bit to more of the tactics that were used by us, as well as the university and the GW and Metropolitan Police Departments. We launched our encampment 2 weeks ago today, so the Thursday before last. Originally, GWPD and the university threatened to sweep our encampment that very first day by 7 p.m. That was the deadline that we were given. However, again, as multiple people have said, community came in droves. Thousands of people flooded the yard where we had set up the encampment and prevented Metropolitan PD from sweeping that first day. Later that night at 3 a.m., the day after that very first day, this was revealed in a Washington Post article in the days following that event. GW wanted to have GWPD and Metropolitan PD sweep the encampment again at 3 o'clock in the morning. We saw also some level of police mobilization that morning, and we were prepared for arrests and a sweep that night. But it turns out Metropolitan PD actually themselves refused the order from GW because even Metro PD was worried about the optics of sweeping an encampment of peaceful protesters who were simply doing an encampment, an occupation of that outdoor territory to push forward our demands. This has been consistently what has happened over the course of these 2 weeks, where GW has made threats about sweeps and arrests, threatening to clear our encampment, to clear our protests. And again and again and again, it has been the community showing up. It has been the power that we've built as students. It has been the safety measures and the resource distribution that we have formed as a community that has prevented this level of repression. Until 2 nights ago, when GW took advantage of our lowest point during that time. Yesterday, the day after this sweep happened, was supposed to be a congressional hearing where DC Mayor Muriel Bowser, as well as the Metropolitan Police Department, were going to be called in to testify, basically explaining why they chose not to sweep that first night. This congressional hearing was pushed forward by several openly fascist Republican congressmen, as well as Democratic congressmen, who had visited the camp throughout the week, harassed us as we formed this encampment, made disgusting, dehumanizing statements about us and about the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine, who we were there pushing our demands for. And the night before this hearing was supposed to happen, in which Bowser and MPD were supposed to testify, that is when they launched this raid. Something that is very specific about the Metropolitan Police Department is that they are very worried about optics. In 2020, they were forced to fork over $16 million in a lawsuit against the heightened police violence that was used during that time. And so this is part of also the reason why they waited so long. And this is also the reason why they forced anyone who was not a student who was going to be arrested out of the encampment. They pushed press out of the yard when they were making these arrests. They pushed legal observers out of this area. They even pushed a medic out of the area and made sure that not a single person could see what was happening inside, that we could not film these arrests, could not film the violence that happened to my 4 comrades who are on this call right now. And in order to reinforce that, they also pushed students away from the streets. We were forced to leave very early on the arrests, but when we heard that our comrades were being taken out on the other side, many of us ran to another intersection to try and see them and support them from the outside. That's where we were stopped by police, who responded extremely violently. Many of my comrades were violently assaulted by the police. Me and several other of my comrades were thrown to the ground, had our heads, our faces slammed into the road, slammed into bikes, and many of us were pepper sprayed from inches away from our faces. And so these are the tactics that the university has chosen to use, that Metro PD has chosen to use, not even just to clear the encampment, and not even just in order not to give in to our financial demands around divestment and academic boycott, financial disclosure, and protection for pro-Palestine speech on campuses, but in order to ensure that their violence couldn't be filmed and seen by the media, by legal observers, and that students couldn't even get medical treatment as they were being brutalized by the police. And so this has really been the form of repression that we've faced. Our university president has continued to put out disgusting statements filled with completely false information about the nature of what happened at this camp. Again, as many of my comrades have described, this encampment was not violent. It was not. It was a radical world where we had pushed forward this idea of popular education, the popular university for Gaza. This idea that we want our education to be used to support what we want as students, not to turn us into workers who will one day profit off of the ruling class, right? These are the same universities that sprung up during the intifadas in Palestine, and is really formed around this idea of true revolutionary pedagogy. And that is what was so threatening to the university, so threatening to George Washington University and to our university president and to their profit line, that they chose to brutalize us and arrest us and sweep the encampment, rather than simply meet the very, very simple and easy and ethical demand of not funding a genocide of Gaza. Yeah.
Do you all want to talk about the actual raid? And maybe Yasmin, were you there at the raid? Of course you were.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
So I know my comrades just spoke a lot about the police violence, but for the raid, we were on pretty high alert because while we were shut down very violently, we are also as prepared as we can be, and the knowledge and the smartness and the finesse of students and organizers always inspires me so much. And so we kind of knew that they were going to sweep us that night, and we saw multiple media vans, meaning
the police or the mayor or somebody invited them, invited those leeches to record us being brutalized. And so they came in big black SUVs, and that's kind of when we were like, okay. And we saw suspicious behavior from the police that night. And then right as I was about to cross the street to go back to Shahadat Square to U Yard, after putting my stuff in the car, I saw about 50 cop cars drive down the street, and I was like, okay, it's happening tonight. Right after the cop cars drove down, we saw over 100 officers on bikes heading towards the liberated zone. And from then we started waking people up from their tents and making sure everybody was awake. The cops around 3:30, they kettled us in. They began kicking tents, picking up tents and throwing them. As a Gallaudet University student, I was personally worried about my comrades, my classmates, because they're deaf, and these cops, these pigs, didn't care about anybody's safety. Of course, they were throwing tents, they were kicking tents, and so we were thankfully like prepared for that, making sure that we had someone to wake them up. But yeah, that's an added layer of preparedness that we had to have, especially in DC, where there's such a huge population of deaf people. We knew that there would be deaf people involved in our encampment, and which is very, very important, and as well as we knew that it would be students from Gallaudet. So we were prepared for that. The cops GWPD first gave their warnings, and then MPD started to give their warnings. But we had a solid group of about 30 to 35 students and a few non-students ready to sit down and lock down in the middle of Shahadat Square and essentially be arrested, be physically removed, because we were not going to leave our liberated zone that we had been in for 14 days. Until our demands were met. And so, of course, the cops gave us their 3 warnings, and after the 3rd warning, while we kept chanting, they came into the circle. They moved in. I heard a lot of cops admitting that it was their first time arresting anybody, so they were practicing on us students. They came in, they started arresting people. They started being excessively violent for no reason. One cop in the white shirt actually grabbed my wrist and started twisting, and I was like, bro, like, what's up? And he was like, stop resisting arrest. And I was like, I'm literally just sitting here. But it's like you can tell that they're having fun. It's like they want to. It's like they've been waiting. They were so excited to finally arrest us. You could see the looks on their faces. They were making disgusting comments. One of our comrades was in a wheelchair. They arrested him to his wheelchair, and actually when they were putting him in the arrest van, they were making jokes within themselves about, oh, should we push him off his wheelchair? What happens if we blah, blah, blah. Absolutely disgusting. And then once we arrived to the facility, we were chanting from inside the van as they were taking us out one by one. And one of my comrades, my other hijabi comrade, got out, and we were chanting, and then we were like, wait, stop, because we heard her yelling, and she was yelling at the cop, don't touch my hijab, do not take off my hijab. And one of the MPD cops, Mendez is his last name, removed her hijab, obviously without consent, and just stared at her. And so it's like, it's almost fun for them. And you just see that they have no greater purpose other than to serve the state and other than to serve imperialism. When our encampment has a greater purpose, our encampment is there fighting towards liberation and fighting towards dismantling these systems. And we're very passionate about these things, and we're doing it for a bigger reason, and we're struggling for a bigger reason. And they are spending their night raiding a bunch of students and brutalizing a bunch of students. And so, yeah, I know we talked a lot about the police violence, but I think, like my comrade said, it was a little bit of like grief after the encampment was destroyed, because we are not used to having this type of community. We are not provided with this type of community, or the place we live in is not built to function in this type of shared, like, socialist structure where everyone's playing their part, everyone's contributing, everyone has a meaning, everyone has a purpose, everyone feels useful, and everyone is looking out for each other. We don't have that until we create that, and that was part of the idea of the popular university, and it just happened very naturally where everyone is like assumes that role immediately, that they're going to be a part of this, they're going to do this, and so a lot of us felt isolated and alone at the end because we didn't have that community anymore. But I think it's important to remember that we do still have that community, because part of that encampment was building those relationships to take out of the encampment as well, and building ourselves up as organizers and understanding maybe a little more materially what Gaza experienced, although we can never understand, but understanding what a small scale siege looks like, or understanding what it feels like to live in a tent, even though our tents were a lot more bougie than the tents set up in Rafah right now. Just understanding that on a deeper level, as well as, an IOF soldier coming to campus, and us having to stare someone in the face who we know kills our people, a sniper who was actually just in Khan Yunis. And so that kind of thing, like, that builds us all up as organizers, that builds us all up individually. And so although we might not have the material encampment anymore, we took a lot away from this experience, and I'm really excited and thankful to use everything I gained moving forward, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Yasmin and Lance and Yaya and Nada, as well as everyone here, and of course Bashar. I see Bashar all the time, so I tend to keep him to the end. I want to show a quick clip from the press conference that was held yesterday, and it was held here in DC at CARE in response to the brutal dismantling of the GW encampment. And the reason I want to show it, because I actually spoke there, and I want to show just a clip from what I said, is that we're talking about the police, and that's sort of to be expected. But what has been extremely disappointing, like beyond disappointing, I'm so mad, I'm so upset, I'm so disappointed with our colleagues, a lot of our colleagues, not all of them, a lot of our colleagues who are silent, or who are basically saying, let's get these kids out. I'm disappointed with our staff and administrators, who are, many of them, that are saying the same things. And most of all, I'm disappointed with our presidents, who are actually leading the charge in most of these cases. So this is just a short clip. Let me go to it. Not our future. These students are our present. Students are not our future. These students are our present. They are leading us in the present, not in the future. And you are crushing them instead of upholding their spirit. This is inconceivable that we are all doing this. And history will not forget. We will not forget where every single one of you has stood. Last night at dawn, people at the GW encampment, that included DC, Maryland, and Virginia University students, were violently and brutally dispersed. The encampment was swept violently. At the same time that for many, many days, they were protesting peacefully. It was a Zen moment every single moment you visited the encampment, and yet they were treated like criminals by the police, by our presidents, by our administrators, and supported by many of our faculty. This is shameful, and it will come back to haunt all of you who did not stand up for the rights that we all taught our students to stand up for. And time will tell where everyone stood today. Okay. So, anything else you'd like to share from the GW Encampment Collective before we move to NYC? Sorry, to Colombia, actually.
Really quickly, yeah, not only like was the police and administrative response like completely brutal, and in my own opinion, a tactical mistake because it just gave us more and more energy from the community around us, but it was completely intentionally done on a day where our programming was supposed to be focused on scholasticide. Our programming for the entire next day was focused on the phenomenon of scholasticide, both here and in Gaza, in Palestine. And that night we were supposed to do a commemoration for the martyrs who were unable to graduate their universities in Gaza, as well as all of the universities that were destroyed over there. So I just think that it symbolically speaks to the testament of the police state and its goals, that on a day where we were meant to be talking about its own repression of education and pedagogy, do they dismantle and brutalize a popular university?
And also, one last thing I also want to add last is throughout the entire encampment, through the what was just hours before getting to 2 weeks of this encampment, from the beginning, we have asked for a meeting with our university president, with our board of trustees, and for 2 weeks they have refused to meet with us. This has included, we have literally been outside of her house waiting with a negotiations table saying, come out and speak to your students and discuss the demands that we have been pushing for these 2 weeks. And not once has our university president chosen to speak with us or to meet with us. And she has instead chosen to hide behind the faces of low-level administrators who have only negotiated us on completely absurd terms, including not suspending students if they were, quote-unquote, not resisting while being arrested. That is the extent of the negotiations that they have made with us. But again, we are not stopping. It doesn't matter how many times they arrest us, how many times they beat us, how many times they pepper spray us. Our liberated zone, Shahada Square, is not going anywhere, and we will keep fighting. And we will continue to push our demands, which are fundamentally divestment from the genocide happening in Gaza, academic boycott of all relationships with Israel, a full financial disclosure of GW's investments, and full protection for pro-Palestinian students and pro-Palestinian speech that includes dropping the suspensions on student organizers who have been pushing these demands for 2 weeks.
Thank you all so much. Let's move to Colombia. Fadi from Colombia, you are, you waited a long time because you guys were maltreated last week more than this week. So we had to go with the people that were actually, had a really, really rough week this week. But your story is evidently, the Colombia story has been the biggest by far for many, many reasons. And we'd love for you to share with us your experience. Before we get to the what next question, we have Fadi speaking on Colombia, John Doe speaking on NYC. John Doe is the Jadaliyya correspondent as well as powerhouse all around NYC. And of course, we have UCLA chiming in before we get to the questions of what next for all of you. So Fadi, the floor is yours.
First of all, I'm just very inspired by all these other universities who mobilized and created their own encampments so quickly, considering, I mean, we've been planning for months, and just seeing how quick the turnaround was for all these universities around the nation and around the world to, emulate, and, and also seeing how creative they could be in different things that we took from them as well, but So we started on April 17th, and planning our encampment, like I said, took months, and we decided to do it on the day of Manu Shafiq's congressional hearing. We figured it'd be a lot of pressure and she'd be questioned about it, and it just would be symbolic as well. We've tried multiple forms of protest, as all of you guys have, to try and meet our demands, and nothing worked. So we figured escalation was the best method, and this was our first step in escalating, which was the first encampment. It lasted about 36 hours. We were eventually swept away. I was swept away in that first encampment. And while I was in jail, I didn't know what happened, but apparently a bunch of people jumped over to the next lawn and just began another encampment. For days after, we weren't allowed to have tents up, or police would be back on the lawn. So people were sleeping out there in the cold and rain, literally on the ground, just with blankets. It was, I mean, it's nothing compared to what people are going through in Gaza. So not to say like it was like the worst thing ever, but like, I mean, it was horrible just seeing, at least 100 students out there on the lawn, laying out there in the rain and in the cold. Eventually, our negotiating team worked with the university to allow us to let up a number of tents. Probably a PR move for them. I don't think they wanted the news, recording a bunch of kids sleeping outside, in the rain. And the second encampment, carried on for, well over 2 weeks. It was a beautiful experience. I mean, to see all these people come together for Gaza, and, people I haven't normally seen at protests, or, I've seen here or there, just coming together in solidarity. Seeing the students, the faculty who, would encircle the encampment anytime there were risks of any type of, police presence or any type of sweep coming. Having my own professors come to me personally and just, asking how they can help me, what they can do. It was a beautiful experience in that sense. Obviously, we're doing it to, meet our demands and meet these goals and speak out about the atrocities happening in Gaza. But to see how many people were really standing with us, and how many people are willing to put their futures on the line to speak out for, what is right. So we kept going on with that encampment for quite a while before we decided escalation was necessary. Our university was not negotiating in good faith. I won't go into detail about negotiations because I wasn't a big part of this, but a lot of it was just, they just used fear tactics to make us clean up and leave. So much so as even suspending our negotiator at one point, who is, on a visa, and then lifting the suspension the next day. Just anything they could use to try to get a hold on us. So eventually they came the next day after that with pamphlets asking us to leave by 2 p.m. And if we don't leave by 2 p.m., then we would all risk suspension, expulsion, etc. Everybody stood their ground. Literally everybody stood their ground. The university mobilized. We had hundreds of people surrounding the lawn. I want to say probably about like 80 to 100 people still staying in the lawn. And we stood our ground, and nothing happened that night. One other thing I want to say is, aside from community inside of campus, faculty and staff and students, we also had the community outside New York City, be it, students from around, or just different organizations within New York City who would mobilize day after day after day, keeping a presence around Columbia, and also other, CUNY and NYU and other campuses who've mobilized at this point. And it was just beautiful to see how many people were willing to risk, arrest and, again, their time, and just trying to protect us and uplift us. And, it was a beautiful experience. More on community I would like to go on is, if you've seen Columbia, it's a fortress essentially. And what they did was they pretty much trapped us within Columbia. And if you leave, you wouldn't be allowed back in, especially, the suspended students. And they tried to bleed us out, not allowing food in. If they saw anybody coming in with blankets, anything, whether they were students or not, they would stop them. Seeing the community show up to the gates, sliding food through the gates, sliding blankets through the gates, having community from New Jersey and New York City as well. Palestinian families would cook us dinner, for like the entire encampment. It was a beautiful thing to see, and we found workarounds, getting through the fortress around Columbia to keep the encampment going, and it was just, again, I say a beautiful experience despite being swept, despite our demands not being met. Seeing the community and seeing everybody mobilize together for a common goal was something that uplifted me. For the first time since October, I felt that complete solidarity within the New York community. So other things, I guess. So I guess I can go in more detail about the sweeps So the first sweep, when that happened, it was about 36 hours after we mobilized. The way the university went about it was Manu Shafiq essentially lied to the NYPD, saying that there was violence on campus and it was imminent threat of students on campus. And the NYPD, of all people, released a statement saying that that was not true. It says a lot about Manu Shafiq. And the way they dealt with this was throwing all of our belongings, confiscating all of our items, suspending all of our students in the first encampment. And going on to the next encampment, the police presence on campus remained. We had at least like 12 police officers, an increased security presence, as well as public safety presence at every single gate. Getting on campus, even if you were a student who lived in dorms, it was a hassle. They began restricting restroom access. They began to only CUID holders. So again, a lot of us were suspended who made it back onto the encampment, and restricting food access, restroom access, threatened of eviction. It was the way Columbia's went about this was horrible, from the first encampment to the second, and then ultimately whenever we needed to escalate after the pamphlets were distributed and taking its all. And it just.
Thank you so much.
Right.
I'm
Hello,
hearing from
everybody.
everybody that there's a kind of, these encampments were remarkably well organized. There was a code of conduct that was, gently enforced throughout. There was a kind of solidarity most of us have not experienced in the past. And there was a certain kind of festiveness, but of course that was overshadowed by the genocide in Gaza, which was the most important focal point for everyone, and that there was that this vibe was undergirded by community support, and with an ethos that encouraged a kind of disruption of ordinary hierarchies that are generally part and parcel of campus life. We haven't yet heard from John Doe from New York's NYC, so if we could pivot to them at the moment, that would be great. John Doe?
Sure thing. Thank you so much for having me. And I also know that there's going to be a rep from CUNY joining in a couple minutes, so I'll let them speak about the CUNY encampment, and I can provide more of a general kind of update with regards to the situation, broadly in New York City. Since the last session, which was a week ago, essentially every encampment that was standing at that point has been swept. That includes, Columbia and CCNY, the City College of New York, as well as more recently NYU, the New School, and FIT. Specifically, NYU and the New School were swept on last Friday, very early in the morning at around 6 a.m. Many of the folks, similar to what it sounds like happened at UChicago, many of the folks essentially woke up to the sound of the LRAD, the dystopian robotic police voice telling everyone they're going to be arrested. And they swept the encampments. And then 2 days ago or 3 days ago, the NYPD sent what looked like a small army to sweep FIT, which was at that point the last standing encampment. And although all of these students' encampments have been swept and have left many hundreds of people arrested, it hasn't actually diminished. And if anything, it's only further energized and invigorated the people of New York to come out for Palestine even more, and even more passionately. We see that our struggle here in New York City under this intensely repressive, essentially police state, is completely interconnected with, both materially and ideologically, the occupation and the genocide and the settler colonial project of Zionism in Palestine. And so, even though the encampments have been swept, we've seen that people are coming out in larger and larger numbers to, mass marches, to rallies, wanting to take on more autonomous action, doing things that a few months ago were tougher to conceive of. There was the Met Gala was a few days ago, and thousands of New Yorkers came out to essentially rally and disrupt it, get in the way, really, disrupt this essentially like Hunger Games-esque show of wealth at a time of, escalating genocide. It was the same day that Israel began its ground invasion of Rafah. And at the same time, we've seen that, the strategies of New Yorkers in general, not only students, but more broadly, have gotten more and more creative. Yesterday, actually, the new school faculty, not even just students, but faculty, established the, I think, first ever faculty Gaza Solidarity encampment in the new school, in the same site where they had swept the students only a week prior, which is not only a really significant escalation for what faculty have been taking on, but also is an immense show of solidarity with their students who were previously swept, who were arrested, who face this incredible police violence. And hopefully, just as the Columbia students inspired other students to set up encampments, the new school faculty will inspire other faculty all over the U.S. and all over the world to join in this project. And what also we've been seeing is that as they continue sweeping these encampments, and as the NYPD, these universities, these right-wing publications kind of escalate their attack on student organizing, on encampments, on Palestine. At the same time, we see that they're very intent on crafting a broader narrative about these encampments more generally. The deputy commissioner and the chief of patrol of the NYPD, Kaz Daughtry and John Chell, went on essentially a number of news interviews and made their own like weird kind of like hype videos on Twitter to basically talk about what they found at the encampments, that they found like numbers of zines. And in fact, when they swept NYU again at 6 a.m, before making arrests, Kaz Daughtry essentially just walked through the encampment, picking up random zines, trying to find some sort of language that he can then take to like the New York Post and Fox News and all of these publications in order to be like, look, these students are being radicalized and these students are being influenced by so-called outside agitators, a narrative that in New York City and broadly, they've been pushing that, this can't just be an organic student movement, and students can't just be radicalized because, folks have been essentially watching a genocide take place in 4K for 7 months now. But in fact, it has to be some sort of, external force that is financing and organizing and teaching these students. When in reality, we know that, this movement is organic, and this movement is very much one where students have been learning from one another, as Fadi from Columbia alluded to. And yeah, these commitments, like not only to escalating policing on, this uprising and students, taking on these more escalatory tactics, from encampments to buildings to whatever it may be. It's not only about policing, it's also about the, very material, tangible commitments that the NYPD, these universities, and these, publications have towards Zionism, to the Zionist project. We know that Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, the cop mayor of New York, as people refer to him, as well as Kaz Daughtry, deputy commissioner, were on a trip to occupied Palestine this past August, where they were specifically going there to study how the occupation surveils and monitors and represses Palestinian people in the West Bank, hoping to bring that kind of technology and strategy and logic to New York City. So quite literally, the drones that they use to watch Palestinian people in the occupied West Bank, they want to use here in New York City. And recently, Kaz Daughtry talked about how he wants to have, drones flying over Central Park all the time so that they can constantly surveil and monitor, not even just political activity in New York City, but just everyday activity. And again, like as this progresses, New Yorkers are coming to terms with the fact that the technologies and the logics and the practices and tactics of Zionism, of occupation, of apartheid, of settler colonialism, and of genocide, these are technologies that are going to be exported to our country and to countries all over the world and to people all over the world. And they're going to, as everything does, affect, the marginalized, the poor, working class, black, brown, unhoused people who are struggling in our city and cities and, places all over the world. And so as this is going on, we essentially have these two growing, escalating forces. We have the force of people, of students, of faculty, of community members, of organizers, of medical workers and educators and everybody else essentially taking on escalatory tactics, getting more creative, being willing to take on more action, being less fearful of what police repression looks like. And at the same time, you have police and the rest of this, repression apparatus that is kind of foundational to their logic, escalating not only the narrative against our movement, but also the strategies by which they want to use to repress it. They are getting physically more violent. They are arresting more people. They are, jumping at the bit to essentially police and repress and surveil anything. It used to be 7 months ago, they would send police to protest, but as early as March of this year, during the Gaza 5K, an annual 5K that's hosted in Brooklyn, as a fundraiser for children's mental health in Gaza, there was the SRG there, the Strategic Response Group, which is a unit of the NYPD that has essentially become like the protest police, you could call it, even though that was not their original purpose. And this is the unit of the NYPD that actually goes to occupied Palestine and trains with the Israeli National Police. So the exact tactics and strategies that the Israeli police use, this exact unit, specific unit, the SRG, uses here in New York City. And, they're not just coming to protest now. They're coming to any sort of, Palestinian event, and it's essentially growing into this return into broken windows policing and this logic of, how can they constantly be surveilling and repressing and monitoring and silencing, Palestinian activity, Palestinian life, not even just political activity, but also, life and activity and expression and autonomy in Muslim and Arab communities more broadly. We're seeing this narrative and tangible return of a war on terror era policing in New York City. Perhaps the key difference is that this time the people are, not letting it happen. I'm not saying that people let it happen 20 years ago, but rather that people are very ardently, fighting against it. They are getting, like I said, they're getting more creative. We have the encampments, people have occupied buildings, people have, disrupted major events, and we understand that this is about Gaza. This isn't about us. We understand that any, sacrifice we might make by way of our careers, of disciplinary action, of arrests and, reaction from the state, it frankly means nothing to us because it's a fraction of what the people of Gaza are experiencing, especially now as Israel is, commencing what many are considering like the final stage of this genocide, the final stage of this ethnic cleansing. What do we have to lose? And what do we have to hold on to if we're willing to let Gaza go? Because their goal at the end of the day of this, security apparatus is to turn the logics that made Gaza into what it is today. They want to export that to every, oppressed community, into every poor working class black and brown community. And it is on us to stop it right now. We have to stop it right now by any means necessary and by any means available. And people are not only waking up to this fact, people realize this fact and people are taking action on this in ways that are immensely inspiring. And I'll pass it on to the CUNY rep to specifically talk about the situation at CUNY, because I think that is, again, conversing on the community dynamics in New York City and organizing not just on campus, but throughout the city and connecting these in and outside of the university is an extremely important project that CUNY has really been the tip of the spear on here.
Thank you so much, John Doe. Let me just say before, well, let me make sure I'm using the right name. Before Hadiqa joins and shares the CUNY narrative, we don't have tons of time. It's 4:36, and we still have to hear from the UCLA students, and we still want to hear from you your vision about the future. By the way, you can be very careful, and you can refrain from sharing anything if you don't want to share. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you this. I'm just sharing that it's really totally up to you to share whatever you like. So if we could be as a bit more concise going forward, so we can get to everybody. Thank you very much, Hadiqa, for joining us. Marie and Lee, is this what you want me to call you? From UCLA. Thank you for being patient.
Thank you so much, Bassam. Thanks for having me. It's so nice to be in this space of like so many cool people. I feel a lot of good energy. Thanks for having me. I'm Hadiqa from CUNY. I'm a student at City College, and I'm an organizer at the CUNY Gaza Solidarity Encampment. Our goal is everybody's goal, divestment. And I think our encampment to me stands out the most because we have this intrinsic element of Palestinian liberation within our demands that's also intersected and interconnected with people's liberation, which we've seen as a beautiful example from so many other encampments across the nation. And I think within our 5 demands that we have presented, you can kind of see a lot of that interconnectedness. Our demands were divestment. Our second demand is an academic boycott. Bismillah. An academic boycott. The third is solidarity. Fourth is demilitarization of CUNY and Harlem specifically, where CCNY is. And the fifth is a people's CUNY, a free CUNY. So free access to higher education, because that is a human right. And I think that you'll see a lot of that in the encampment and how we have intentionally chosen to bridge the gaps between the local Harlem community and our encampment, the gaps between, workers' liberation and people's liberation and Palestinian liberation, Black liberation. So yeah, I'm really happy to talk more about it. But in regards to future and the plans, I think we can all say that this is not the end, but for security reasons, of course, we're not going to disclose specifics.
Hadiqa, do you have your Siri or phone or car set up to say Bismillah when you say boycott?
Oh my God, what? It's so funny. I have this little machine that reads like the dua before you start driving.
Okay.
But it says Bismillah. So, alhamdulillah, it's always perfect timing.
Thank you so much. And thanks for being concise. We really appreciate it. We will come back to you if you want to disclose anything about your strategies or your vision or what you think should happen going forward in terms of your activism. Let's go to UCLA. Marie and Lee. Lee, is this what you want me to call you?
Lila.
Lila. Okay, I know you put Lee on your... okay, Lila. So Lila. So Marie and Lila, first I want to thank you for persevering. I mean, you've been waiting for an hour and 30 minutes. I appreciate you waiting. I appreciate your patience. The floor is yours.
Yeah, no worries about that at all. This has been extremely inspiring and just honored to be with you all. We'll make it quick, though. I think we have similar experiences from our encampment. I'll talk about encampment, a little bit of negotiations, and then maybe Lila can go on with our extremely violent raid. We had a great community, of course, and something that we've all wanted, a space of no police, a space of solidarity, a space of true liberation and centering Palestinian liberation. We had, prayer 3 times a day, of course, poetry, grieving circles, screenings, focusing on, centering Palestinian voices in our encampment, things like that. But one thing I will talk about that some camps have experienced, but we really experienced every single day was a very aggressive and violent Zionists that harassed us day and night. Being in UCLA, the west side of Los Angeles, this was extremely difficult to deal with, but our community, kept us safe. That was our biggest thing, that we keep us safe. And we said that day in and day out. Even day one, we experienced aggressive counter-protesters that said the worst things I have ever heard, to people who directly have had family members be murdered. And racist, Islamophobic, even anti-Semitic things to people in our camp. Constantly carrying their Israel flags. Our university allowed a counter protest to happen a few days after our setup 2 Sundays ago, which they raised almost $100,000 for, and had like over 1,000 counter protesters. We decided to keep each other safe within our encampment that has been barricaded the entire time, but we had an immense amount of support from our community that really was on the front lines during that, and kind of guarded our encampment. I'm saying this all because this is just, again, what this system of intimidation that has just been set up for 76 years during this occupation, and this system of intimidation and silencing that we really saw for our week of our encampment, but we know that it's just been occurring for the entirety of Zionism. And we experienced harassment each night. They would come with their loudspeakers and have pretty much psychological warfare, which is just experienced by Palestinian prisoners, for decades and decades. They would be quite violent, often trying to break through the barricades. We had multiple threats, of gun threat and bomb threats. A whole bag of mice was attempted to be released onto our encampment. Just a very, very extreme harassment day in and day out. Until it led up to what I'm sure many of you have seen was the larger attack that happened on the Tuesday night of over 100 of a mob-like Zionist attack, in which we were literally fighting for our lives. And it's important to know that the university originally deployed our university police and then retracted that. Eventually, the attack began at 11. They had over 100 people were bear maced or pepper sprayed. People were beaten very much. 25 people were sent to the hospital from our side. All while the university was aware of this, and while the university was standing by, and the hired extra campus security was standing there and laughing. Eventually, LAPD came at 1:30, in which they stood in about 100 yards away and watched this violent attack happen, where it was extremely scary. And all we could say is we keep one another safe. And it was proven right there that the police do not keep us safe. They didn't start to move until 3 a.m., which they just walked in. No arrests were made by the counter protesters. And this wasn't a clash. This was a complete attack. So I'll just, kind of wrap up there, in that this is just so, and they stood there with impunity. And, we don't have weapons. We don't have impunity. And I think that this Zionist project has always felt that they have impunity to anything that they said, anything that they do, just as Israel has impunity to international law, things like that. We hope with our demands, that's why we are changing this, but it was just a direct example of what Gazans, what Palestinians have been going through forever. And we experienced it over a week, this intense harassment. And so, negotiations, we had the vice chancellor come to our encampment the next day, pretty much for all him to just tell us that they're going to sweep us for our own safety, which is clearly not the case, because they stood by without making any moves the night before. So negotiations are difficult right now because our chancellor is under a lot of rep, and there's going to be probably a vote of no confidence in which he might be removed. But we are continuing negotiations in ways. I'll pass it over to Lila to talk about what occurred on the second night of violence.
Thanks, Marie, and thank you all for being here. I know we're some of the last people to speak, and I'm going to try to keep this brief, but it's been incredibly inspiring to hear how similar our experiences have been throughout the country and to feel the solidarity even between the screens looking at you all. Before about the police sweep and the violence that occurred on last Wednesday night, Thursday morning, I just want to echo that although from the beginning of our encampment, which actually started 2 weeks ago today, there was harassment from Zionist attackers every single night that escalated. It was also the most collaboration and community that I have ever seen as a student at UCLA in my 4 years on this college campus. And I think that it was this, as many people have echoed here, this beautiful experience because we were all there united in our goal of freeing Palestine. And I think that that was just very clear in every single thing, every single event that was organized, even in the ways in which we would keep each other safe. All of these Zionist attacks would remind us of the violence that is actively going on in Gaza and ground us in why we were there and why we are here as students, still calling for divestment, still organizing. There are 4 more weeks in this quarter at UCLA, and we are here and we are organizing and we are not backing down. To talk a little bit about the police raid that occurred that Marie mentioned. So after the violent Zionist mob attack on Tuesday night, we were told by our vice chancellor, that there was going to be a sweep, and we came together as students, as we have through this entire process, to keep each other safe, because that is really what we have learned. And also in that, I want to say that we are keeping each other safe, and we are keeping each other safe because we are calling for safety for all people, and we are calling for safety for the people in Palestine and Gaza. So basically what ended up happening is our chancellor told us they were going to sweep, and we had protocols as students to try to keep each other safe. And then during the night, they sent in specifically highway patrol to clear the encampment. There were hundreds of police that we saw. And the reason that they specifically sent in highway patrol, we believe, is because highway patrol is allowed to use rubber bullets on students. So we had multiple students shot with rubber bullets. And also the police using flashbangs. And I think what I want to make really clear here is we don't see the police raid that ended with the arrest of 210 students, and then on Monday with the arrest of 40 additional students who were peacefully protesting. We don't see those events as isolated. In fact, we very much so clearly see them as tied together, because we had, for example, during the police sweep, Aaron Cohen, a ex-IOF special operations intelligence officer on our campus working with the police. So it's very clear to us that our university is specifically was specifically acting last week to not protect students during the violent Zionist attacks, and then as a justification for violently sweeping our encampment. And all of this is to say that this is representative of the larger systems of oppression of repressing pro-Palestinian advocacy here at UCLA and in Palestine and throughout the country and throughout the world. I want to end, I think, with talking about, I briefly mentioned this, but we also had a group of students and press and legal observers illegally detained and arrested on Monday. And this is just an extension, as we have already talked about, of our campus, quite frankly, becoming more and more of a police state, as they see collective student power and as they see us coming together and calling for an end to this genocide. And that brings me to how we're feeling today, which is we will continue to organize. We have students holding processing spaces, and these processing spaces are a space for us to come together and ground ourselves in our continued fight. And as I said before, this was the most inspiring thing that I have ever seen on my college campus, a hub of community that I have never seen on our college campus, both with UCLA students, with students throughout LA, with community members throughout LA. And it's just shown us and grounded us in the fact that we have power as people and we have power as students, and we're using what we have learned here to stand up and fight for people in Palestine, and we will not stop. And we will not stop for the rest of this year, and we will not stop in the years to come or the summer.
Thank you very much. That was extraordinarily moving. And what I'm gathering from everybody here is that the genocide in Gaza is the greatest political and ethical litmus test of our time, and that you guys are struggling, fighting for all of us and for a better future, a more ethical, a more politically salutary future. And I guess I want to end with asking you, each of you, starting again with the University of Chicago, now what? Given the repercussions from the brutalization, police brutalization, but also vigilante justice on the side, but also of the kind of political camaraderie and inspiration. What are the kinds of repercussions of this experience, and what are you taking from this for the future?
Thank you for this question. Again, like salutes and love and solidarity to everybody here, everybody who's faced violence, everybody who's continuing to sacrifice, continuing to stand together, shoulder to shoulder with people who hopefully will all be committed together in this for a long time. And we see what's happening at every campus. We learn from you guys, and uh, nobody is in it alone, and no matter what they throw at you, there will be eyes on it, and we will. If there is something that happens at your campus, we will have a response on ours. Um, with that being said, like just to talk about like some of the steps that are relevant to our campus. First, the Democratic National Convention is being held in Chicago in August. So our campus is. Our campus protests, but also the encampment that's ongoing at DePaul, the encampments that were came to an end in either by police or by negotiations at Art Institute of Chicago and Northwestern. These all bear on the political and organizing situation that will lead up to that convention, which, as we know, in 1968. Because of the Vietnam War protests, ended in a huge mass protest and put so much pressure on the city. And so that's one of the contexts that we're working towards. What we do on this campus, we see it as interlinked with that, and also, we had to ground ourselves in the fact that this is one of the biggest Palestinian communities in the city, and ultimately that these are the people who we look to as a compass and like to take direction from. So that's one set of points. The other set of points I would say is that by building our encampment, we really, University of Chicago is on the south side of Chicago. It's a highly militarized bubble. And we have to reckon with what it really means to exist outside and be in a highly surveilled, highly militarized, racist environment where Black students, but particularly Black community members, are brutalized, are arrested regularly, and because so many of the people in our group, in our coalition, are committed to things like abolishing the police and getting working towards building alternatives to prison and carceral systems, and developing solidarity across Black and Palestinian, but also workers lines, right? This is we have to as a coalition strengthen ourselves internally, and also reach out to the organizations that exist in our broader community, and figure out what the best way is to work on these issues, which are integral to any organizing that we do, right? Like the way the police respond to us affects how they will also respond to other community members, and vice versa. So that's another like strategic objective that we're working towards.
Only thing I would add to that is a couple comments that I'm sure everybody here already agrees with, already knows, but I'll say anyway for the benefit of viewers maybe. We just had an interview immediately before this, and unsurprisingly, the interviewer's angle was, how are you feeling after this essentially defeat? How are you going to regroup? ... This is a completely nonsensical narrative that needs to be like actively resisted. Encampments getting shut down, as we have already seen at Columbia and other places, like that is not the end of anything. That is an escalation which calls for counter escalation. Like And we are in growing positions of strength because we're not operating as students on just particular campuses alone. We're operating as part of a national movement and an international movement, including with Palestinian students at Birzeit now. So I think the biggest thing is, obviously in general terms, the next step is to continue fighting in whatever way is most effective for Gaza. And that will remain the next step until the genocide ends, until Palestine is free. What that looks like in a particular context, I don't think there's a formula. I think it's a matter of figuring out, in specific cases, it may be the best thing to go all in on supporting a neighboring campus. In other cases, it might look like pursuing legal action against a university in ways that might force them to concede things for fear of financial and legal repercussions. There's a lot of possible routes, but the most important thing is just do not from my perspective is we cannot in any way, shape, or form cede ground to this idea that we're being defeated and we're being crushed, because it is not true, and because it is a narrative that is actively harmful for this movement. So it's both false and damaging, and we need to resist that. We're gaining strength every day.
Thank you very much. GW, would you like to respond to that or add from your point of view? What is now what? There's several GW folks on here, but I don't have the list of names, so I'm not sure. Lance, maybe? Are you there still?
We can go maybe to UCLA.
Yeah, let's go to UCLA, because also you guys are both, Chicago and UCLA are, as I understand it, both on the quarter system, which also means something in terms of time left in the actual quarter. Leila?
Yeah, I can mention this a little bit before, but we are still organizing, and I think hearing from our comrades at University of Chicago and all of you here has been so inspiring, and standing up for each other at different universities, as well as sitting at the negotiating table, which is something that is happening, as well as organizing protests, as well as organizing ways for us to take care of our community as well, so we can harness this strength. And I think this movement and all the encampments have brought in so many students as well who maybe weren't previously involved with organizing. And I just want to echo briefly what our comrade said at the University of Chicago, which is this narrative that we are defeated is completely false, and that this has taught me personally how to organize so much better. And I have learned so many skills over the past 2 weeks on how to come together and how to continue until Palestine is free, until all people are free.
Great. And Fadi, if you want to speak to this issue of, sounding the death knell prematurely, and a death knell prematurely, and in a way that, in fact, undermines or is counter to what is actually happening.
I want to echo what I forgot your name, but from UCLA, what they said is a lot of people learned and became better at organizers through this experience, and I just think we need to continue escalating and being more creative now that we do have more how we're going to escalate. But I do think we can't just go back to art builds and simple protests. We need to keep moving forward.
And what do you think, how are you imagining, without disclosing anything you don't want to disclose around strategy, but how are you imagining moving forward now that Columbia is about, I guess graduation is this week or something, next week, somewhere around there? And what are you thinking about in terms of regrouping and strengthening?
We've seen autonomous groups within Columbia going to the Board of Trustees' homes and protesting outside first thing in the morning, trying to, again, get creative. If we can't get inside of the campus, we'll do something outside of the campus. As well as what U of Chicago said is also our community, our struggles are all aligned, and figuring out how we can help like the Harlem community as well and stand with them. So it's just, joining all of our struggles and again being creative in whatever way we can. In terms of escalation, I can't go into too much detail, but we need to get more creative is all I will say.
Mm-hmm. Bassam, as our fearless leader, are you? I noticed that there are not as there are a number of people listening, but there are some of the folks have had to drop off the
Yeah,
call.
actually, at GW and George Mason, a few of my students and friends are going to a rally right now for the encampment and for what has been happening in Washington, D.C. So they had to drop off, and folks, we sort of didn't warn them that this might actually go way beyond 90 minutes. So if we are satisfied with what we have shared, and you are satisfied precisely, not me, we can say so long and come back and speak next time with some of the same people, but also others who have been frankly emailing and texting and sharing that they would like to come. It's just the time did not work out. Also, others are sharing that they are continuing with their activities. Faculty are also sharing that, as you heard in New York, a faculty encampment was set up. I am not sure how many more will be set up in the summer because of the structural situation this summer. But I'm sure that we will continue to speak with folks. The reason we are doing this is, not to debunk what's being said about the encampments, and we could talk about this another time, but essentially for all of us who support this movement, who are objecting to what's happening in Gaza, to just come together, learn about each other, and frankly, at the end of the day, to be empowered by each other. And it's so empowering to listen to you guys. My colleagues, my friends, my associates, people that we do all kinds of work with, have been extremely inspiring. But nothing comes close to how empowering it is to hear from you all. Not just because you're the future, as I said yesterday I think some people might have been a bit ticked off because I said it's not that this generation is our future, just like other generations, equivalent younger generations were in the past. This generation is special, and it's special not because you guys are genetically special, but it's special because the world you are inheriting is far more damaged than the world we lived in. And Alisa can probably support me on this,
Yeah.
so your vigor and your insistence on the now is something that we didn't have. It's not that we did not want things to happen quickly, but the urgency of now that you all have at this point is something that I have never witnessed, not even with the generation right before you. In other words, the people in their late 20s, right? Or early 30s. So we learn from you, and we hope to exchange ideas and strategies and thoughts with you. And I hope you can come back and stay strong, stay safe, and just stay the way you are, most
Yeah,
importantly.
really. Thank you so much. Really, huge amounts of gratitude for everything you do to try to make our world better, our shared world.
Thank you so much for hosting us, and I just want to say, especially like I've watched the Jadaliyya videos, like the Gaza in context videos, like since the beginning of the genocide. They have been so valuable. The guests that you brought have been so valuable, and especially I believe it was a quote from you, Bassam, like in one of your interviews that you said that you think about, like the people who are in prison, like what would they not be able to do when they're in prison? That's what you do when you're out. I found that a very inspiring quote. And also, of course, thank you to Professor Wedeen for supporting us on our campus, like even after our sit-in, or like even before that, like just been like a very strong like bastion of pro-Palestine faculty. So thank you, and thank you of course to Columbia and UCLA. Like it was so beautiful to meet you guys. Hopefully, we'll meet in person soon.
Thank you guys so much. Thanks for your words. I was gonna say Amira, because we took so long with this conversation. I thought Amira grew a beard because she was sitting next to Christopher, but I guess not. It's not Amira. Thank you very much. Remind me your name, Habibi.
Hassan.
Hassan. Too many of you have long hair and a beard. I got شوي confused between you, Fadi, and Bashar. Christopher, also, thank you so much for joining us. You know, you have gone viral because of your eloquence on the spot on television when you were asked that question, and the whole time you were just turning as though you're going to just speak for a second, and they let you talk for a long time. It was a very inspiring interview, and you kind of said it all. Right. We all appreciated that. And Fadi, thank you so much. Habibi, your Columbia presence, all of you has been, a guiding light also for other campuses. And Leela at UCLA, I can't imagine what you guys have gone through. I think you were the pioneers in terms of being the recipients of rubber bullets. It's just unbelievable.
It is incredible.
It's unbelievable, right, Lisa? Especially given the picture that we saw, or the videos that we saw of the encampment, right? You're just like hanging around, protesting, being amazingly peaceful, and as the conventional people like to say, civil, because that word is loaded with all sorts of like anti-brown meanings under the radar. So it was just astonishing how this level of violence was ratcheted up to disperse you guys. And then John Doe in New York, I'm really surprised you're not in jail yet. But we need you at Jadaliyya, and we need you in this world, and your eloquence in summarizing what's been happening in New York, not just now, but for the past several months, because you also joined us on the first edition of what we're doing right now, about 3 months ago, to talk about what you guys have been doing in New York. So thank you for your diligence and your courage and your oomph. It's really inspiring, all of you. So, and Lisa, thanks for gracing us and for being such a strong anchor and a rock for people at the University of Chicago. I hope
we
that
have an FJP with at least 130 official members and about 180 adjacent members. So it's a strong showing of faculty at the University of Chicago, and I'm very proud to be a small part of that.
Absolutely. Thanks to all dozen of you who joined us today. We had a lot of people commenting, a lot of people viewing. I mean, well over 14 or 1,500 by now. And I hope to speak with you all soon. Please be in touch and stay safe.
Thank you.